Hi, I'm Vina. My father told me not to come to his retirement party. No explanation, no hesitation, just silence dressed as finality. There wasn't a seat for me at the table, not even my name tucked discreetly on the napkins as if my existence might stain the celebration. But worse than being left out was watching from a distance how easily they handed over my work. My words, and even my carefully chosen silences to someone else, then applauded as though it had always been theirs to give away. They erased me methodically first from the photos, then from the speeches, then from the RSVP list itself. A clean sweep as if I had never belonged. And yet irony has a cruel sense of timing. His boss stood raised a glass and called me the boss. Not my father. You ever wonder what it feels like to build the stage brick by brick, only to be locked outside when the curtains rise? I'll never forget the moment my eyes skimmed that seating chart, my heart snagging on one small detail. Buster, the family dog, had a reserved place, a gold-foiled placard gleaming under the heading Family Pet, and me nowhere. That was when absence became something sharper than rejection. It became proof that I wasn't just unwanted, I was invisible. It was a Tuesday, the kind of indecisive spring day where the air can't decide between warmth and chill. I sat at my desk with a lukewarm mug of peppermint tea, scrolling through emails before a client pitch. Then my phone buzzed. A forwarded message from Mrs. Greer, our former neighbor, who assumed I was already in the loop. So excited for the big event. Can't wait to see everyone at Luther's party. Attached was the seating chart. Long tables, printed name cards. Claire, comfortably at Dad's side, my brother Ethan, 2 seats down. Even the dog immortalized in gold foil. But me, a blank space where my name should have lived. Not a mistake. Not a forgotten detail. A deliberate absence. I stared too long at the screen, then slowly turned toward my printer. I opened the drawer where I kept the thick cardstock reserved for investor briefs, the kind of paper that carried weight permanence. And I printed my own invitation. Simple, sharp, deliberate, to Vina Warren, you are formally uninvited from the celebration of Luther Warren's legacy. Attendance not required. Participation discouraged. At the bottom, I signed his name in cursive. I folded it sealed. It addressed it to my parents' home and dropped it in the mail that afternoon. I didn't need a reply. The absence of one would be answer enough. That night, after wrapping up an investor review, I called my father. No small talk, no pleasantries. Just an offer of help. Logistics, design. Catering. I've managed events where millions were at stake. One retirement dinner in Raleigh was child's play. His response was polite, practiced, and devastatingly clear. Let's keep it simple this time, he said. You won't be speaking at the party. Not can you help. Not you're too busy, so maybe next time. Just you won't be heard. I thanked him anyway out of habit, then hung up. Afterward, I tried to remember the last time I'd spoken freely at a family gathering without being interrupted, corrected, or dismissed. I think it was a holiday toast when I was 27. I made a joke about healthcare stocks, and Claire tilted her head, smirking, "Speak English, Vina." That was the moment I learned my voice carried no currency in that room. I stopped offering stories after that. Silence, I realized, was safer. Growing up, dinners always looked the same. My father at the head of the table, Ethan, close by Claire, across from them, polished aligned visible, and me. At the corner nearest the kitchen where footsteps and clatter would drown me out. That seat wasn't random. It was chosen. I wasn't forgotten. I was managed. They didn't know what to do with a daughter who refused to fit their mold. I didn't wear heels on Easter or cry over heartbreaks in the living room. I didn't hand over grandkids or wedding registries wrapped in ribbons. Instead, I handed them spreadsheets, portfolios, 6-figure returns. Contributions too sharp-edged to be celebrated, too untraditional to be called love. And maybe that was the real crime. I didn't fail them. I just didn't fit them. That wasn't something they could brag about over Sunday brunch or in the polished comfort of church pews. My achievements didn't fit neatly between mimosas and hymns. They weren't stories they could retell with pride to neighbors in pressed suits and floral dresses. And yet, despite everything, I believe they loved. But it was the kind of love that lived in shadows. A love that didn't require acknowledgement, didn't need to be said out loud, and certainly didn't survive the light of day. A week ago, my father posted a picture on LinkedIn, beaming confident celebrating 30 years of leadership. The caption read, "Wouldn't be here without my incredible kids." Claire was tagged. Ethan's name appeared with effortless pride woven into the sentence like it belonged there. But me, absent, not forgotten, not overlooked, just omitted. I read the post 4 times. Not because I was shocked, but because repetition has become its own ritual. I've been trained over the years to search for my name in their words, in their stories, in the spaces where I might exist, and to adjust my expectations accordingly when I don't. That same night, as I sat at my desk under the yellow cast of my reading lamp, my phone buzzed again. Another email. This one by accident CC'd to me by the caterer. The subject line, "Final place card list for Mr. Warren's event." I opened it, scrolling slowly, eyes catching on every name. Read it once. Read it again. Claire, Ethan, aunts, uncles, colleagues. And then at the very bottom, the name that broke me. Buster reserved family pet. The dog had a seat, a gold-foiled placard no less. But me, no Vena, no youngest daughter, not even a ghost of a placeholder. The worst part wasn't being left off the list. The worst part was the realization that no one would notice. My absence wouldn't register as a mistake because in their eyes it wasn't one. The next morning, the chart still sat open on my laptop. I hadn't closed it. I didn't need to. The image had already etched itself into my memory, clear as ink. My coffee sat untouched, turning bitter and cold on the desk. Instead of packing for my upcoming panel in Atlanta, I found myself scrolling again through my father's. Maybe there was some hidden acknowledgement, some small mention tucked away. But there was nothing. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I hadn't been excluded accidentally. I had been removed. Later that week, while I was preparing marketing slides for a major partnership launch, I caught sight of a familiar name on LinkedIn, one of my father's retired colleagues. He had written a glowing post honoring Luther Warren for his decades of leadership, calling him a man of vision, of dedication, a father with a family to be proud of. I should have swiped past it, but I didn't. Instead, I clicked. My father had replied graciously, thanking Ethan and Claire for their unwavering support. And then in the comment thread below, a question appeared. "Didn't you say you had a 3rd child? What's she up to these days?" His answer came quickly, effortless, practiced. "She does data stuff. Hard to explain. Not. She's a strategic advisor. Not. She leads health impact investment portfolios for a national firm. Not. She presented to the Department of Veterans Affairs last quarter. No, just data stuff. Hard to explain." That wasn't vague, it was intentional. It was dismissal dressed as simplification. It was erasure cloaked in casual words. It landed in my chest like a stone cold and immovable. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I just sat there in silence, reading it over and over until the letters melted together. 2 days later, while I was reviewing a vendor agreement over Zoom, my phone lit up. A name I hadn't seen in years. Don Mallister, one of Dad's old friends from his early finance days. I let it ring once, twice. By the 3rd, I answered, but there was no voice. Just a voicemail notification. And for reasons I couldn't quite explain, my hands trembled, just confirming both kids will be at the party, right? Looking forward to meeting that sharp daughter of yours again. Irene was sitting nearby when the voicemail played. I heard her say, almost casually, "That's Don calling," before passing the phone over. My father didn't pause. He didn't stumble. His voice was smooth, certain. "Yes, my 2 wonderful kids will be there." And that was it. My stomach didn't twist. My pulse didn't spike. Those reactions had burned out years ago. You stop expecting fire when all you've been given is cold ash. Irene didn't blink, didn't correct him. She just folded the laundry neat and practiced like his words hadn't erased me from the family in real time. I waited foolishly for something more. A correction, a hesitation, anything. But the silence that followed was heavier than any lie. For a fleeting moment, but instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the budget document for the $12 million health equity fund I was overseeing. Numbers made sense. They were clean, honest. They balanced when you treated them right. Families, on the other hand. Families broke in ways you couldn't fix with formulas or projections. I typed in a line item adjustment, hit save, and closed the file. That evening, I wandered through old photo albums on my phone. Claire's graduation party. Her smile-wide dad beaming beside her. Ethan's engagement dinner candles lit laughter spilling through the frame. The retirement brunch we threw for Dad years ago when he first announced his transition into lighter responsibilities. I remembered the catering bill that had landed in my inbox, which I paid without hesitation. I remembered drafting the speech Claire delivered that day word for word, line for line. And I remembered sitting quietly afterward, never introduced, as if I scrolled through a few more messages. One from Claire asking me to help her navigate student loan consolidation. One from Mom about a roof leak at their house, something I quietly solved by wiring money to the contractor. Over and over, the pattern repeated. I was remembered when I was useful, never when they were proud. That realization sat heavy in my chest, like stone immovable. Because here's the truth: when people can't summarize you, they erase you. It's easier that way. And eventually, erasure becomes routine. That weekend, while polishing the slides for my Atlanta keynote, another email landed in my inbox. This one accidentally forwarded from my father's executive assistant. A thread of RSVP confirmations, hotel bookings, event updates. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. Near the bottom was a note to the hotel staff. Please reserve 2 rooms for Luther's children, Ethan and Claire, and 1 for Claire's sister. Can't recall her name. Just Claire's sister. A footnote. Peripheral. Optional. I stared at that line, my mouth dry. My fingers hovering over the trackpad. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. I simply sat there, the words searing into me. You start to wonder when you're left off enough lists whether you're hard to love or simply too inconvenient to acknowledge. And the cruelest part, no one even notices they've forgotten you. So when my phone buzzed the next morning and Claire's name flashed across the screen, I already knew she wasn't calling to ask how I was. I let it ring 3 times before declining the call. Her message arrived seconds later. Short, clipped, businesslike. Mom wants your RSVP final. Planners are getting anxious. Not we, just Mom. As if I were a vendor. A loose end to tie up. A problem to manage. I muted the conversation and turned back. A part of me, naive and stubborn, still clung to hope that maybe this would pass, that the storm would quiet. But another part, the wiser, harder part, had already begun letting go. There are only so many times you can be airbrushed out of the picture before you hand people the brush yourself. Late that afternoon, while double-checking edits in our firm's shared folder, a strange email landed in my inbox. And for reasons I couldn't name, I didn't click away. I opened it. The email came from the center desk of HR, a junior coordinator from my father's old firm. It wasn't meant for me. She'd accidentally CC'd me on a clearance task, a dull housekeeping project archiving post-pandemic employment records. I almost ignored it. But habit made me click. I expected nothing but spreadsheets, PDFs, sterile notes about policies no one cared to read anymore. Instead, buried in the attachment was a digital thread dated 2020. And there it was, my name bold undeniable. 5 emails, 1 memo. All flagged under the header External Strategic Retention Advocacy. I scrolled. Each message was mine. Drafts I remembered writing in the quiet of my apartment at a time when the world was unraveling and budgets were being slashed like loose threads. They detailed my lobbying efforts, quiet, careful, invisible. Emails I'd sent to the board recommending my father remain during the corporate financial cuts. I hadn't argued sentiment. I hadn't pulled the daughter card. I'd dressed it in logic and numbers in the language they respected. Experience, network stability, client retention value. I positioned him as too valuable to let go. And they bought it. He kept his job. And he never knew. No one did. I never told him. I never told Irene. I didn't even tell my own assistant, who stayed late helping me prep the data set that saved him. At the time, I told myself it was right, but reading it now, years later, the glow had drained out of the sacrifice. What once felt like loyalty now felt like betrayal, but of myself. I hadn't just saved him. I had paid for my own erasure. An hour later, while I was buried in a different report, another email slid into my inbox. This one unmistakably from Irene. And unlike the HR mistake, this was meant for Claire. The subject line: speaker order, final draft. The body: Claire will speak after Martin. Let's avoid awkward moments. Better Vina doesn't speak. I froze. Watched the words sit there raw and sharp before they vanished, deleted from the thread within minutes like they'd never been written. But I had already taken a screenshot. No follow-up, no oops, wrong recipient. Just silence. Just deletion. I saved the screenshot in a folder I'd started keeping, one I titled, Things I Don't Say Out Loud. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down on the floor, and stared up at the ceiling until my eyes blurred. How had I ended up here? How had decades of effort, loyalty, and sacrifice become something so disposable? And why, even after all these years, did it still sting like the first time I thought of every quiet bailout? The late payments I covered when Claire lost her job. The roof repair I paid for when Dad refused to ask the HOA for help. The Christmas I stocked the wine cabinet myself, wrapping every bottle under Claire's name so she wouldn't look small in front of Luther's boss. Maybe I was never really the daughter. Maybe I was always the fixer, the buffer, the invisible one who patched cracks only to vanish when the walls looked clean again. And maybe that was why I kept offering. Because usefulness was the only currency they ever accepted from me, the only proof I existed. But when usefulness becomes the only reason you're allowed in the room, what's left when you stop volunteering? I stood up, walked back to my desk, pulled up the event email thread from the planner, scrolled all the way to the bottom, clicked unsubscribe, and set an auto-response: Vina will be unavailable through June 15th. Please contact Claire with any needs. Then I opened another tab. The florist order was still active. A centerpiece scheduled for delivery on the day of the party, white lilies and cheerful head ties, a quiet gesture signed with no name. A note that would have read, "Congratulations, Dad," from someone who still sees you. I hovered over cancel for longer than I needed to. And then I clicked. They wouldn't notice. Not unless someone counted the bouquets. And even then, it would be filed away as a detail, not a wound. I wouldn't explain it. As the sun slipped behind the windowsill, stretching long shadows across the hardwood floor, I closed my laptop. My body felt heavier than it should. I walked into the kitchen, uncorked a bottle of wine, and poured myself a glass. I raised it not to anyone in the room because there was no one but to the silence, to the space I occupied alone. And I whispered softly, almost like a dare, I wonder how many of them will notice when the flowers don't arrive. And the more they clapped for the wrong person, the more it sank in. It wasn't applause I needed. It wasn't even acknowledgement of presence or effort. What I craved was recognition. Simple, honest recognition. A nod that said, I see you. I know the work you've done. I know the thought behind it. 3 weeks out from the party, the world started leaking in. Tag after tag, post after post. Pictures of the grand venue, the meticulously curated menu, even the commemorative wine label Claire had spent weeks helping design. Each click was I was sitting at my desk headset, still draped around my neck after a long conference call, staring at the glowing screen, when I clicked on a video Claire had posted to the event page. Just a sneak peek of her speech, according to the caption. She was rehearsing in the living room at our parents' house, the camera perfectly framed like an Instagram reel. Her tone was polished, rehearsed, her smile soft, approachable. And then it happened. By the third paragraph, she spoke the words I had written verbatim 2 years ago in a policy white paper for a national panel on health system reform. A metaphor carefully crafted about frameworks being invisible until they collapse. Not a common phrase, not something that would be found in any handbook. And there it was, claimed as her own, delivered without pause, without nod, without credit. I shut my laptop slowly, walked to the kitchen, breathed through my nose as though I had just swerved to avoid an accident on the freeway. My chest tightened, then settled into a hollow ache, Later that day, over coffee with Victor Thorne at a quiet cafe tucked off Commonwealth, I showed him the video. He took one deliberate sip, glanced at the screen, then back at me. "You ghostwrite Legacy now?" he asked, only half joking. I shrugged, letting the tension roll off me. Apparently. And I don't even get royalties. He didn't laugh, just shook his head slowly, that mixture of exasperation and understanding only a longtime friend could give. That evening, I joined the family Zoom call. The pre-party prep session where everyone talked over each other, everyone forced excitement, and no one truly listened. My camera was on mute, engaged, and for once I tried not to dissect every word. Conrad, a family friend who always smiled like she had something sweet to say, turned toward the camera and asked, "So Vina, what are you doing these days? Still in health stuff?" Before I could unmute, Claire jumped in with a laugh that was practiced, polished, dismissive. "She does those complex things I can't explain, so don't feel bad if you don't get it." Laughter rippled through the grid of tiny faces. I didn't join in. I stared at my frozen image on the screen, the reflection of my own calm detachment staring back. Quietly, I clicked leave meeting. Outside, the late spring air felt heavier than it had any right to. I walked along the sidewalk, phone in hand, fingers trembling slightly as I typed a message to Victor. "Do I still look too complex to introduce?" His reply came within 30 seconds. "If they can't translate your worth, that's their illiteracy. No fluff, no coddling. Just true." I stood there for a long moment, rereading that line while headlights passed, warming and fading like small reminders that the world kept moving. Then I turned back toward home. Later that night, unable to sleep, I pulled up the local interview Luther had given to the Raleigh Business Journal. I'd skimmed it before barely noticing. This time, I read every word. And there it was. In the second column, he credited Claire for advising him during a critical moment in a key company transition. My eyes blinked in disbelief. That critical moment had been the midnight call I made to Victor 2 days before the merger nearly derailed because of a clause Luther hadn't noticed. Claire hadn't even been aware the deal was at risk. Yet there it was, printed in black and white, attributed to her. This time I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't close the page in frustration. I screenshotted the line and with a slow, deliberate, "Let me know if you need a footnote." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Instead, I logged into the family event portal, scrolled through the list of speakers, and clicked decline. And in that quiet, decisive moment, the first trace of release washed over me. I didn't need their claps, their posts, their recognition. I only needed to decide how and if I would show up on my own terms. Then I turned off my notifications. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But to protect the small sliver of bandwidth I still had left for myself. I wasn't going to keep donating emotional oxygen to a room full of people who kept clapping for the wrong person, celebrating the wrong contributions, rewriting history in real time while leaving me invisible. At midnight, after the workday had ended and the hum of the party threads had dimmed to silence, no TV, no music, just the low, steady hum of the refrigerator and the quiet company of my own thoughts. I stared down at my phone one last time before flipping it face down. Let them have the spotlight. Let them take the applause. I'd built the damn stage anyway. And when your name is left off enough lists over and over, you eventually learn not to write it down. You stop expecting to be seen. You stop leaving spaces for acknowledgement. It was supposed to be just another routine email from the caterer. Nothing urgent, nothing personal. I was clearing out my inbox between meetings when I opened it by accident. The subject line was vague, final seating. Print confirm. My name wasn't in the recipient list, but somehow through some corporate misfire or cosmic joke, it landed in my folder. I clicked. The chart loaded slowly. Rows of circular tables, golden dots marking assigned seats. Claire was front and center, glowing next to Dad. Ethan across the room near the podium, a long head table for immediate family. I scanned it knowing better, but still hoping for a trace of inclusion. Seat 23C. Guest. No name, no embroidery, just guest. For a moment, I wanted to believe it was a technical glitch, a simple mistake, until I scrolled to table 1, bottom right corner. Buster. Gold dish. Label neatly printed. The dog had a seat. The dog had a napkin. The dog had a place in the family lineup. And me, nothing. Claire had designed the napkins herself, gold thread on cream linen. Irene had signed off. They had thought this through from every angle. That night, I poured a glass of red wine and sat on the floor, laptop open, hands trembling slightly as I stared at the screen. I tried to decide which burned more, the sting of exclusion or the weight of being labeled generic. As the wine dulled the edge of my irritation, my thoughts drifted back to 2021. The year Dad nearly lost his job over the internal. A small vendor misbilling, scandal minor by corporate standards, but messy enough to attract attention. He had positioned it as voluntary retirement, but what he didn't know was that I had called Victor's legal counsel directly. I drafted a detailed memo, defended his record, laid out the data and network stability they trusted. They let him stay quietly, cleanly. He never asked how the problem had vanished. I never offered the truth. At the time, I felt proud. Proud to protect the family name, proud to keep the chaos at bay. Now, I felt hollow. That pride had transformed into something heavier, like I'd spent years airbrushing his biography, erasing the moments I had carried in silence. The next morning, another notification appeared. Irene's Facebook post, a family photo at the venue walkthrough. Claire and Ethan front and center. Dad's smile wide, unguarded. Irene holding the seating list. I clicked through. One close-up captured the head table in exquisite detail. 8 napkins each with a name. Even Buster had one, folded neatly, a paw print stitched beside it. And there it was again. The truth, subtle and sharp, the family remembered. The dog remembered everyone but me. Mine was missing. Completely, utterly absent. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even reach for my phone to send a message. I simply opened my email, navigated to the RSVP, and with a deliberate click changed my status from pending to not attending. Then I opened my journal. A single sentence formed itself, precise, cold, and final. If they won't carve my name into linen, they'll never carve it into memory. I sent a short email to Victor, the one person who understood the stakes outside the distorted echo chamber of my family. I'll be in Boston that week after all. If the board seat is still open, I'm ready. His reply came within minutes. It's yours. And this time, front row. That one by one, I deleted every single email thread related to the event, every photo Claire had sent, every spreadsheet, every address list, every seating update. With each deletion, I felt lighter, as if I were finally cleaning a house I'd only ever been allowed to dust. I used to believe family was something you earned like tenure. Be quiet, be helpful, be small, and maybe eventually they'd make space for you. But now I saw it with brutal clarity. I wasn't left out by accident. I had been positioned that way, just like they had strategically seated me near the kitchen at Thanksgiving. Out of sight, out of mind. Around 7:00 p.m., I shut the laptop and made a simple dinner pasta, half a bottle of wine, no music. Just the kind of evening where the silence didn't hurt, it clarified. At 9:23 p.m., my phone buzzed. A group text from the family thread I rarely engaged with. We'll miss you, Vina. That was it. Just a single sentence, perfectly hollow, that made me laugh bitterly. Not all absences are quiet. Some echo louder than applause. And what they didn't understand was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the drop. Monday morning arrived brisk and indifferent. My RSVP had been clear and deliberate. And yet there I was, listed on the family event website as logistics consultant. I hadn't signed up. I hadn't agreed to contribute. And yet somehow I had become the help again. I refreshed the page twice, 3 times. My name stubbornly remained. By noon, I was in my Boston office, neck stiff from hours of Zoom calls, when a package arrived. The return label read Florence, Italy. I already knew what it was before opening. A year ago, I'd ordered a custom fountain pen for my father, engraved with a Latin phrase he loved to quote about legacy and time. I had planned to have it delivered just before the party. The box was wrapped in soft tissue, tied with a navy ribbon. My name was nowhere on the card. Later at 4:12 p.m., Claire sent a message in the group chat. Dad loved the pen BTW. Beautiful gift, vintage. Wow, how thoughtful of you, Claire. My name wasn't mentioned. I didn't respond. I didn't correct anyone. Instead, I opened the order receipt in my email, screenshotted the transaction, and archived it. Not out of spite. Just as a record, a proof of reality in case the gaslighting grew louder. The next day, while finalizing a client handover document, another forwarded email landed in my inbox. It was meant for legal review, sent by a junior staffer. I scanned it without thinking, then paused. It was an internal summary about the merger, the one we'd nearly lost in Phase 2. And under strategic lead, there it was A. Warren. My title. And for the first time in months, I felt that old familiar tingle, the one that comes before everything finally changes. One of your dad's guys just found out you ran that deal. Expect static. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:31 p.m., an email from Luther appeared in my inbox, forwarded from one of his partners. Subject line: Didn't know your daughter ran this thing. My father's reply was short. Neither did I. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Neither did I. As if running the deal had been some secret I owed him an explanation for. As if every fire I'd quietly extinguished on his behalf demanded a status report. As if my labor, my skill, my foresight somehow needed his acknowledgement to exist. I closed my laptop. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. I walked across the apartment, poured a glass of water, and sat with the weight of all the versions of me they'd rewritten without consent. The versions that existed only in their story, their memory, their select. The next morning, I logged into LinkedIn. I found the official announcement about the merger and reposted it with a caption. Sometimes the people who know least speak the loudest. Thankfully, results don't lie. No tags, no hashtags. Just the truth sitting there like a mirror too bright for some to look into. It gained traction quietly among the right people in the right circles. Later that afternoon, I began compiling a folder on my desktop. Screenshots, receipts, email threads, event flyers, confirmations. I named the folder Undeniable. Not because I intended to use it as a weapon or to confront anyone, just so I would never again wonder if I had imagined the eraser, the omission, the deliberate rewriting of my history. I didn't need an audience. I just needed proof. By nightfall, I felt clearer than I had in weeks. No explosions, no dramatics, just decisions. Quiet, deliberate, unshakable decisions. The next morning introduced me as Claire's little sister to a visiting investor. For the first time, I didn't flinch, because I finally knew exactly who I was. And in that moment, for the first time, they were the ones caught in the echo. And in a room full of rehearsed speeches, the one thing they could never prepare for was the sound of truth hitting back. I hadn't planned to be anywhere near the party. Life had other ideas. By coincidence, the Hilton Garden Inn ballroom in Raleigh, of all places, was hosting both my father's retirement celebration and my private investor dinner. Same evening, same building, different floors. Fate, as always, has a sense of humor, and its edges are sharp. I arrived through the side entrance, laptop in hand, entirely focused on the meeting ahead. Until I heard my name. A junior executive from the merger team spotted me near the elevators. Vena, he called, voice cautious but friendly. Didn't know you were down here. Victor said you might swing by. Want to step in and say hi? I waved him off politely. Just here for a short meeting, I said, though. Curiosity tugged at me stronger than I cared to admit. Passing the main ballroom, I caught Claire's voice over the speakers. Doors cracked open just enough for the sound to slip through. Her tone was polished, rehearsed, practiced, the voice of someone who had claimed work that wasn't hers as her own. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I just listened. Because I knew this time I wasn't part of their narrative. I was standing outside it, sharp, deliberate, undeniable. And the story they thought they controlled was about to meet someone who had long since learned the power of being seen by the right eyes. The room was bathed in golden light laughter, bubbling through the air glasses, clinking, the low hum of conversations filling the space. The exact phrasing from a keynote I had delivered at a national healthcare policy forum last fall. The metaphor about scaffolding and systems failing quietly before they collapse mine, painstakingly crafted in a 2 a.m. haze of caffeine exhaustion and relentless editing. And now it was hers. Polished, rehearsed, delivered with that perfect smile, that perfect pause as if applause could be summoned at will. I stood outside the ballroom door, heart-still phone in hand. I hit record, not for confrontation, not for revenge, just documentation. Inside, the crowd erupted, clapping and cheering. I heard Luther's voice cutting through the noise. "That's my girl," before fading into the chorus of hands striking glasses and tables. I didn't walk in. I didn't interrupt. I stepped back into the hallway and sank onto a nearby bench. From there, through the faint reflection on the glass doors, I glimpsed the screen childhood photos, graduation caps, family vacations, birthdays, all familiar, all incomplete. All of them conspicuously absent of me beyond the age of 18. I watched Claire's college montage, Ethan's wedding, Luther standing with colleagues through decades of company milestones. Even Buster the dog had more screen time than I did. The realization settled around me like a weight I had carried silently for years. A woman in heels passed behind me, paused, then looked down. "Aren't you Vina?" Her eyebrows lifted in curiosity. I nodded a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I thought you were in the slideshow." "That's odd." I smiled without teeth. Apparently, I had left the story too early, too inconveniently to make the final cut. She blinked, smiled nervously, then moved on. I stood, walked into the lobby bar, and ordered a glass of white wine, seeking the kind of calm only solitude could offer. At a corner table, I pulled out my phone and split-screened Claire's speech against my original keynote video, side by side. No editing, no commentary, just raw proof. I uploaded both videos to a public folder with a single caption. Sometimes words travel without permission. No names, no hashtags, just the truth. Within minutes, my phone began to buzz. A few reactions from former colleagues, a note from a past board member, even a message from a journalist I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't open them. I sipped my wine, closed my eyes, and let the noise pass over me like waves breaking on a distant shore I had long since left. 10 minutes later, I slipped out through the side entrance. Quiet, unseen, unbothered. The vibrations on my phone hadn't stopped, but I didn't look. Missed calls, texts, and then a number I hadn't seen in a while, Luther. He wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. He was calling because the mask had just slipped visible, undeniable in front of too many people. And in that sudden weighty silence, I realized something I hadn't been able to name before. I wasn't mourning what I had lost. No. That moment wasn't grief. It was recognition. Watching them in real time come to terms with a truth they had long refused to see. They were finally realizing what they never deserved in the first place. My silence. My loyalty, my restraint, my mind. The ballroom hadn't recovered, not from the video, not from the truth. And I didn't need to be inside it to witness it. Because sometimes the most powerful presence is the one that chooses not to show up. The aftermath lingered like smoke curling and drifting through the room, hard to see, impossible to ignore. Glasses clinked, but nobody toasted. The string quartet played on, valiantly straining to stitch the atmosphere together with arpeggios and delicate trills, as if the music alone could mend the fissures that had split the room open. But it was too late. The mood had cracked, and everyone knew it whether they wanted to admit it or not. Claire had vanished, entirely disappearing without a trace the moment the whispers began to carry weight. Irene sat stiff, brittle, her hands twisting and fidgeting as though she could wring the tension from her own fingers. Luther, ever the tactician, had retreated backstage, probably convening with his handlers, running damage control in the shadows, rehearsing words that would never reach the truth. And I stood quietly against the far wall, not in hiding, not anymore, but far enough from the center that I could watch them unravel without stepping into the chaos. I wasn't sure what I intended to do next. I hadn't planned for this moment. I didn't need to. The truth had arrived ahead of any script already speaking for itself in the stunned silences and the stiff, awkward shuffles of those around me. Then Victor Thorne took the mic. No theatrics, No clearing of his throat like a man preparing for performance. No scribbled notes, no exaggerated smile. Just presence. Steady, sharp, unshakable. He raised his glass slowly, letting the room fall into an anticipatory hush. You've built many things here. He began, his voice calm but edged with weight reverence. His gaze swept the room, catching each face, pausing only briefly when it landed on Luther, who had reemerged from the back, standing like a man bracing for a blow he didn't see coming. You've built a name, a culture, a reputation for excellence. Polite applause, obligatory nods, but what impresses me most, Victor continued, voice firm, unwavering, is what your daughter has built outside this room. Out of sight, out of credit, relentlessly, quietly, with more integrity than most of us in this building combined. The room shifted, the air changed, people leaned forward slightly. Some stiffened, others looked around as if the walls themselves had started whispering truths they hadn't been ready to hear. Silence became alert, tense, a weight hanging in the space that couldn't be ignored. And since truth, Victor said, lifting his glass higher, deserves the mic more than tradition. I want to toast the strategist who saved this company's future, asked for no recognition, and earned more respect than anyone I've worked with in years. He paused. Not for effect, not for applause. Simply a beat. Then he turned. Not to Claire. Not to the front of the room. The room seemed to fold in on itself for a moment, every eye slowly realizing, every heartbeat catching in its chest. The acknowledgement wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was absolute, undeniable. I felt it settle over me like sunlight breaking through clouds I hadn't realized were there, warm and steady. And for the first time, I wasn't just standing in the room. I was seen. Fully. My boss, he said. Clearly, deliberately, Vina Warren. Gasps. Actual, tangible gasps. Like a scene from a movie where someone finally says the thing nobody was supposed to speak aloud, the word everyone had been avoiding. The room fell into a hush, thick and uneasy. Suits rustled as heads turned toward the back, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Wait, Vina's here. Forks clattered to plates, glasses were lowered mid-sip. Eyes darted. I watched Claire freeze across the room, her face draining of color like someone had flipped a switch. Irene's mouth fell open in disbelief, and Luther's eyes narrowed just enough, a flicker of calculation passing through them before shifting away, like pretending it didn't matter might still salvage the moment. I didn't march forward. I didn't seize the spotlight. I took one calm, deliberate step out of the shadows, just enough to be seen. Victor's gaze found mine. He lifted his glass toward me. I returned it with a quiet nod. No grand speech, no flourish. Just presence. My silence now carried weight it had never held before. The applause came. Uneven at first. Hesitant. But real. Some clapped like they had always known. Others clapped like they were realizing belatedly that something essential had been missing all along. This wasn't performative. This was acknowledgement. Recognition that had been denied for far too long. The room shifted after that. Laughter became cautious. Jokes were measured. Eyes that had once skimmed over me now lingered, recalibrating, reassessing. The invisible boundary I had carried for years had finally been acknowledged. I didn't linger. I turned, walking toward the ballroom exit with a calm certainty. My phone buzzed just as I reached the doors. A name flashed on the screen, one I hadn't seen in a long time but recognized immediately: Luther. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice came flat, controlled, but beneath the careful calm, I could hear it wounded pride. You humiliated me, he said. I let the moment stretch. I let it breathe. I didn't speak. Silence in that instant was louder than anything I could have said. You should have stayed out of it, he continued. Not angry, not furious, just tired, disappointed. As if I had failed to perform my assigned role in his carefully scripted narrative. I let the pause hang, then answered simply, neither did I. For a few suspended seconds, we existed in mutual recognition, not reconciliation, Not forgiveness, but clarity. Something between us had broken long ago. This was merely the moment it surfaced. Finally, I ended the call. I stepped outside into the cool night air of the parking lot. The music inside the ballroom hummed softly, muffled behind thick glass doors. But I wasn't thinking about the music anymore. I wasn't thinking about them. For once, I wasn't the one holding the cracks together. I wasn't stitching silence over cruelty. I wasn't swallowing my truth so that someone else could stay comfortable. I was standing in the open air. No spotlight, no speech, just stillness. And for the first time, I allowed myself to take up space in it. I wasn't waiting for them to love me better. I wasn't hoping for recognition. I was living fully as the version of myself they had never bothered to know. 2 weeks passed. No, not even a passive-aggressive text, just silence. And it said more than words ever could. Claire posted soft focus photos from the party, her at the podium, Dad smiling beside her, a cropped crowd clapping politely. The caption read, "A night we'll never forget. Legacy matters." I didn't comment. I didn't linger on her feed. I muted her account without a second thought. The fallout wasn't thunderous. It didn't erupt. It was quieter, slower, steady, a reckoning that didn't need spectacle to matter. And in that quiet, I felt the most alive I had in years. Finally, I existed for myself. And that was enough. An email arrived unassuming from one of Claire's brand partners. It mentioned a pause in upcoming campaigns. Routine, almost banal, yet it carried an undertone I couldn't ignore. A ripple of recognition. Later at a conference, someone in the industry mentioned me offhandedly, their tone casual but curious. "You're Claire's sister, right?" I always had a feeling who the real architect was. I smiled politely, hiding the surge of validation and frustration that welled inside me. I pivoted the conversation, discussing market trends, ignoring the subtle acknowledgement that I had long suspected but had never openly claimed. A card arrived from Irene a few days later. No handwriting, no signature, no return address. Just a printed message. "Hope you're well. Take care." It felt like a formality, a mechanical acknowledgement, almost as if to say, "We see you," without ever truly facing me. I held it in my hand for a moment longer than necessary, then dropped it into the recycling bin, letting it remain unread beyond the first line. That week, I took time off. No client calls, no calendar alerts. Just early morning walks along the Charles River, mist rising off the water. I carried with me a stack of unsent letters, words I wrote in my head and burned before I ever hit print, releasing the weight they once carried. I deleted the folder on my desktop, undeniable. Gone. I didn't need proof anymore. I wasn't fighting to be remembered. I was done proving that I existed. The liberation felt unfamiliar, yet steady, like the first breath after holding it underwater too long. That weekend, I flew down to Raleigh. Irene had texted almost mechanically, asking if I could pick up a few boxes she found in the garage. Short, minimal. Months had passed since our last direct interaction. I replied that I'd come by Saturday. When I arrived, the house was silent. No one answered the door. The quiet wasn't eerie. It was familiar in that heavy, untouched way that only homes can be. The beige carpet, the picture frames lining the walls, they were unchanged, frozen in time. One frame near the hall, Claire, Ethan, Luther, all of them, but not me. Somehow the absence stung less than I expected. I carried the box to my car, a surprisingly light load, a few old books, a broken paperweight, a scarf I didn't even remember owning. I paused at the front door, looking back at the house. This time, I didn't see it as a place where I needed permission to belong. I saw it clearly, the difference between being home and being held hostage by history. I whispered to no one. They kept telling me I was too much. Then I realized maybe they were just too small. I didn't cry. I didn't force a smile. I simply left. Back in Boston that evening, I poured a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and settled into work, preparing for a Monday board meeting. Minutes passed in quiet focus before my phone buzzed. Victor. New seat just opened on the board. "You interested?" I stared at the message, the weight of years pressing lightly against my chest. Then I typed deliberately, only if it has my name on it this time. Sometimes the only way to break a cycle is to walk away from the table they never planned to set for you. And this time, I was setting my own. I used to think silence was the same as peace. I learned now that silence only heals when it's chosen, not forced. Walking away wasn't easy, but it gave me something no applause, no title, no family validation ever could clarity. I stopped fighting for a seat at a table that had never been set for me. And maybe that's the moment I finally set one for myself, full, unshakable, and entirely my own. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel like you were too much, I hope my story reaches you in the quiet spaces where it matters most. Life has a way of teaching us that recognition from others is fleeting, conditional, and often incomplete. But your true worth, it isn't measured by it isn't stacked on lists, framed in photographs, or named on programs. Your worth is something you carry quietly, fiercely in the moments no one is watching. The small decisions, the unseen acts, the resilience that refuses to bend to someone else's narrative. I hope that if nothing else, my story reminds you that walking away isn't weakness. Standing tall in a room that tried to shrink you isn't arrogance. Both are acts of courage, of claiming space that is already yours by right. And sometimes the most profound victories are the ones that leave no audience, no fanfare, no validation, just the clarity of knowing who you are and what you will no longer surrender. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a place you once called home or stood tall in a room that tried to dim your light? Maybe you felt invisible while others claimed the credit that was yours. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments, or simply tell me where you're tuning in from. I read every single message, and your voice matters. And if this story touched you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition or relief in hearing it, consider subscribing to the channel. We have more real-life reflections, deeply human moments and stories that honor resilience, boundaries, and the quiet power of self-respect coming your way. Let's keep walking forward together, learning to claim our space, speak our truth, and hold our worth whether anyone notices or not. Because at the end of the day, the one who truly defines your value is you.